Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now, let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The ballroom glittered with soft golden chandeliers as the wedding dinner party pulsed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of sophisticated chatter. Kelechi stood near the grand marble staircase, his hand possessively wrapped around the waist of his mistress, Tonia, a curvy and confident woman in a figure-hugging red dress. She giggled and whispered into his ear while he smiled broadly, greeting old business friends and influential socialites who acknowledged him with respectful nods. He had arrived like a king, dressed in a sleek black suit tailored to perfection, his Rolex peeking from beneath his cuff, his cologne thick with success and pride. To anyone watching, Kelechi looked like a man who had everything: a successful tech entrepreneur, a charming mistress by his side, and the glow of wealth surrounding him. Yet, beneath his polished exterior, a seed of discomfort lingered, one that he suppressed every time someone mentioned his ex-wife or asked why she wasn't with him anymore. "She was holding me back," he often lied. "I needed someone who matched my level." Tonia would usually nod in agreement, though her eyes often wandered to the most expensive things in the room. As the evening progressed and guests floated between tables, Kelechi and Tonia took their seats at the front corner, reserved for VIPs. He leaned back with his wine glass, scanning the room with a smirk, relishing how many people sought his attention. But just as he lifted his glass to take a sip, he noticed something, or rather, someone, walking gracefully into the hall through the arched entrance. His hand froze midair. It was Amaka. She was wearing a deep emerald green gown that hugged her body in the right places, her makeup subtle yet commanding, her natural hair in a proud puff, and a gentle, confident smile on her face. She looked nothing like the woman he had discarded a year ago. Gone was the woman who once wore worn-out slippers to the market or tied faded wrappers around her waist as she scrubbed the floors of their apartment. This version of Amaka glowed like a hidden gem finally discovered. And she wasn't alone. A tall, well-dressed man in a gray tuxedo walked beside her, offering her his arm like a gentleman trained in grace. They laughed softly as they found their seats. Kelechi's grip on the wine glass tightened. The mistress beside him was too busy taking selfies to notice the emotional bomb that had just dropped. Kelechi's heart beat unevenly as old memories came flooding back. The nights Amaka stayed up praying for his business to succeed, the days she skipped meals so he could eat, and the countless times she encouraged him when he wanted to give up. She wasn't just his wife, she was his backbone. But in his thirst for status and pleasure, he had replaced her with someone who looked good on social media but lacked depth. He had believed the lie that Amaka was too simple, too grounded, too village to belong in his new world. Tonia, on the other hand, was flashy, bold, and seductive. She knew how to flaunt his success and stroke his ego. And so he made the foolish choice of discarding the woman who helped him build everything. Seeing Amaka now, beautiful and glowing without his name attached to her anymore, stirred something ugly and unspoken within him. Regret, shame, and an anger he didn't know how to aim. He forced a smile as Tonia nudged him to dance. "You okay, babe?" she asked. Kelechi nodded, swallowing his pride with his wine. But inside something had cracked, and it wouldn't be long before the perfect lie he built began to crumble. The music played softly in the background, and a gentle breeze swept through the open balcony doors of the hall, but Kelechi barely noticed. His eyes were locked on Amaka across the room, watching her as though seeing her for the first time. She was laughing, genuinely laughing. Something he hadn't seen her do in their final year together. Her smile didn't look forced, her body language wasn't tense, and her eyes sparkled with peace he had failed to give her. The man beside her, Raymond, placed his hand gently on her lower back as he whispered something into her ear, and she responded with a giggle, touching his arm lightly. Kelechi felt something rise in his throat. It wasn't jealousy in the usual sense, it was humiliation. He had expected Amaka to crumble after he left. He imagined she'd grow bitter, remain stuck, or desperately try to get him back. But instead, here she was, confident, glowing, and clearly loved by someone else. The sight bruised his pride and mocked the decisions he thought were wise. The woman he called dead weight had become a symbol of elegance and self-worth without him. And the worst part? She hadn't even noticed he was there. Tonia noticed his distracted stare and followed his gaze. Her lips curled in disapproval when she spotted Amaka and Raymond. "Is that your ex?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Kelechi quickly blinked, dragging his eyes away as if he had been caught stealing. "Yeah," he muttered, sipping his drink. Tonia scoffed. "She cleaned up nice, I'll give her that. But she looks like she's trying too hard." Kelechi didn't respond. Deep inside, he knew Amaka wasn't trying at all. This wasn't a woman putting on a show. This was a woman who had healed. Tonia, on the other hand, leaned into his shoulder and posed for another selfie, demanding his attention in the most superficial way. She smiled for the camera, but never for him. She loved being with him because of what it meant: access to wealth, social relevance, and luxury trips. But as Kelechi sat beside her now, all he could think of was how different it felt to sit beside Amaka in the past. She never demanded validation through photos or filters. She never needed shiny things to feel special. Her love was simple, raw, and real, and he had traded it for a plastic version of affection that now felt more like a burden than a reward. The program continued, and several speeches were made. People clapped, laughed, and raised toasts, but Kelechi remained withdrawn. He watched Raymond with keen interest, analyzing everything: his posture, his smile, how he treated Amaka. Was this the kind of man she deserved? Was this who she had been waiting for all along, while he had wasted time chasing fantasy? The thought annoyed him. He had convinced himself that Amaka would never find someone better than him, that she would grow old, bitter, and alone, that her simplicity was a weakness, and her silence a sign of failure. But tonight, that illusion had shattered. The man holding her hand was confident but not arrogant. He didn't need to dominate the room. His presence was calm, grounded, and secure. Kelechi had been loud and aggressive about his success, but Raymond didn't have to say much. His actions spoke, and Amaka's smile said the rest. Kelechi felt a pit open in his stomach as he realized he hadn't just lost a woman. He had lost a queen. Long before the lights and expensive suits, there had been a cramped one-room apartment in Ojuelegba, where dreams were born in whispers and struggles were met with prayers. Kelechi remembered it too well. That tiny space with peeling paint and a leaking roof was a stage where Amaka's unwavering support was on full display. She worked double shifts at a local canteen just so Kelechi could attend coding boot camps. He would stay up at night working on his laptop while Amaka sat beside him, keeping him company with bowls of gari and groundnuts when they couldn't afford food. He remembered her warm hands massaging his back when he was stressed, and the way she'd stay on her knees to pray for him, calling his name with tears in her voice. Those years were hard, humiliating even, but Amaka made them bearable. She made the sacrifices seem like investments, believing that one day their suffering would end. But when the money finally came, when the investors said yes and the first contract was signed, everything changed, not because she changed, but because he did. Success came fast, and so did the pressure to level up. Kelechi started going to elite networking events, where Amaka didn't fit in. She didn't have the wardrobe, the slang, or the polished social skills. She was too modest, too real, too quiet. He started comparing her to the women at those events, women with foreign accents and designer handbags, who knew how to laugh at jokes they didn't find funny. That's when Tonia entered the picture. She was loud, confident, and fashionable, everything Amaka wasn't. At first, it was casual flirting. Then, it became private lunches. And eventually, full-blown cheating. Kelechi justified it by telling himself Amaka wouldn't understand his new world. He accused her of being lazy, of not evolving with him, of clinging to the past. The arguments became frequent. Amaka cried often, confused and hurt, still praying while he scrolled through Tonia's pictures. Then one day, he told her it was over. Just like that. No warning. No mercy. He left her in that apartment and moved into a new place with Tonia. He told himself it was freedom, But that night, when he unpacked in silence while Tonia video called a friend and laughed in the background, the freedom already felt like a cage. Amaka never begged. She never called to plead. She simply disappeared. Kelechi didn't try to find out what happened to her. He told his friends she had moved on, and he was doing better. But even then, there were moments, quiet, haunting moments, when he would remember her cooking barefoot in their little kitchen, dancing to old-school music while preparing beans. He would remember her wiping his forehead when he had malaria, or holding him close when his startup failed twice. She had loved him at his worst, and he had abandoned her at his best. That night at the wedding dinner, as he watched her move across the room with elegance and calm, the flashbacks played like a movie in his mind. He had built his empire on a foundation of betrayal, and now the cracks were starting to show. Tonia looked every bit the trophy girlfriend, glamorous, confident, and picture-perfect. But behind closed doors, she was anything but sweet. It began with subtle comments, criticizing the way Kelechi dressed, mocking his accent, insisting he change his inner circle because they didn't match his new level. Then came the spending. Tonia wasn't just expensive, she was entitled. She treated Kelechi's money like an unlimited resource. She once spent ₦1,000,000 on a handbag and called it a business look. When he raised concerns, she scoffed and called him stingy. Over time, their relationship stopped feeling like a partnership and began to feel like a transaction. Tonia gave him sex, appearances, and public admiration, but in return, she demanded constant validation, money, and attention. And Kelechi, desperate to prove he had upgraded from his ex, kept giving. He silenced his doubts, drowned his regrets in expensive wine, and posted curated photos on Instagram to make his life look perfect. But perfection is exhausting to maintain. Tonia wasn't the type to pray for him when he was stressed. She was the type to complain when he didn't take her on vacation. When his tech company started hitting cash flow issues, Tonia's mood changed. She began spending more time at her spa and less time at home. She flirted openly with his business partners, and when he called her out on it, she accused him of being insecure. "You should be lucky I'm still here," she said once, after he asked her to reduce her spending. Kelechi started staying late at the office, not because of work, but because the silence there was more peaceful than the tension at home. He began to see her clearly now, not through the lens of desire, but through the lens of consequence. He realized he hadn't replaced Amaka with a better woman. He had replaced her with a parasite. The cracks widened the week before the dinner party, when Tonia received a call and left the house for 3 days without explanation. She returned with designer bags and a new phone, claiming she stayed with her cousin. But Kelechi wasn't stupid anymore. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't have the courage to confront it. His pride wouldn't let him admit that he'd been played, used, and abandoned emotionally. So when the invitation to the wedding dinner came, he saw it as a chance to reassert control, to show everyone he was still winning. He bought Tonia a new dress, booked a luxury car, and told himself it would all be worth it. But now, sitting beside her while she scrolled through Instagram, oblivious to the emotional storm inside him, Kelechi realized the lie was heavier than ever. And across the room, the woman he had discarded was glowing in a love that money couldn't buy. After Kelechi left, the walls of Amaka's world collapsed with a quiet force that no one else heard. There were no viral posts about heartbreak, no dramatic confrontations, and certainly no shoulders to cry on. It was just her, in that one-room apartment filled with echoes of a love that used to breathe life into her. The pain wasn't loud, it was suffocating silence. For the first few days, she didn't eat. She would sit on the same spot of their shared mattress, staring at the ceiling, waiting for answers that never came. Her friends had warned her that men change when they make it, but she never thought Kelechi would be one of them. He wasn't just her husband. He had been her partner in struggle, the boy she believed would become her forever. So when he walked away, accusing her of holding him back, it felt as though she had failed at everything, at love, at womanhood, at life itself. But survival doesn't come with sympathy, it comes with choice. After 2 weeks of being numb, Amaka packed the remaining clothes Kelechi didn't take and left the apartment. She couldn't afford rent. She moved into a small wooden kiosk her friend's auntie used as a spare storage shack behind a mechanic shop. With no steady job and no qualifications beyond her SSC, Amaka began cleaning homes in the early mornings and washing clothes for busy mothers during the weekends. Some days, she earned barely enough to buy herself a sachet of water and a loaf of bread. The humiliation stung. People who once envied her relationship with Kelechi now looked at her with pity. But Amaka held onto one thing, her dignity. She never went online to drag him. She never responded to the gossip. She just worked, cried when no one was watching, and prayed silently at night under the moonlit sky from that kiosk. What hurt the most wasn't the suffering. It was knowing that while she struggled to eat, the man she gave everything to was flying first class with another woman. Even during the darkest moments, Amaka refused to let bitterness define her. She borrowed a small phone from a neighbor and began watching free YouTube tutorials on event decoration and bridal interior setups. At night, she would gather empty water bottles, balloons, or carton pieces to practice what she learned. She had no resources, no one to help her, but she had her hands, her mind, and her quiet resolve. Slowly, she started offering free small-scale decoration services for neighborhood birthdays just to gain experience. And people noticed. One woman paid her 5,000 naira after a small setup and referred her to another. That was the start. Amaka was rising not loudly, but surely. Each pain she endured became fuel, and each job she took brought her one step closer to becoming the woman she saw in her dreams. Independent, elegant, and untouchable. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from cheating or lying. It comes from being abandoned while being loyal. That was Amaka's pain. She didn't lose Kelechi to another woman. She lost him to pride, to ego, to the illusion of a better life. She had fought for him, defended him, starved for him, even prayed for him harder than she prayed for herself. And when the money came, he told her she was too plain, that her loyalty had expired. For a long time, Amaka blamed herself. She wondered if she should have worn makeup more often, if maybe she had gone to university, or maybe smiled more in public. She dissected herself like a broken machine, searching for the fault that made a man walk away after everything. But eventually she realized she wasn't the problem. The problem was that he wanted a woman to celebrate his victory, not one who survived his battles with him. The emotional scars were deeper than anyone knew. One day, while decorating a small wedding venue, Amaka overheard a bride talking about how she dumped her boyfriend when he lost his job. The girls laughed, mocking the idea of suffering with a broke man. Amaka had to step outside. She stood behind the hall, fists clenched, and wept, not just for herself, but for every woman who gave her all only to be discarded when the fruit of her labor bloomed. Love, she had learned, is not always enough. It can't compete with greed, ego, or lust for status. But instead of letting that truth destroy her faith in love, Amaka decided to redefine it. She would no longer love anyone more than she loved herself. She would no longer kneel in front of a man who wouldn't even bend to wipe her tears. Her healing wasn't fast, but it was real. Day by day, she turned her pain into purpose. She learned to dress, well, not for validation, but because she deserved to feel good. She learned to speak up, not to fight, but to affirm her worth. With time, her decoration work expanded. Clients started trusting her with wedding receptions, baby showers, and birthday events. She registered her name as Amara Events and Decor. With the little money, she saved and printed simple flyers. She didn't need pity, she needed a chance. And she gave herself one. Her body carried the weight of unspoken grief, but her heart, it was beginning to beat with new hope. She no longer looked for Kelechi's name on social media. She no longer asked mutual friends about him. She focused on the woman in the mirror, the one who had survived abandonment, hunger, and shame, and still stood with her back straight. She wasn't healed yet, but she was healing. And sometimes that was more powerful than pretending everything was fine. It was a sunny afternoon when Amaka met Raymond. She was decorating the lobby of a hotel for a corporate client's anniversary party. Sweating, balancing ladders, and adjusting ribbons, she barely noticed a man in a suit watching her work with quiet admiration. Raymond had come for a business meeting, but arrived early. He stood for nearly 10 minutes, observing the way she gave instructions, her attention to detail, and the graceful way she moved with purpose despite wearing a simple shirt and trousers stained with paint and glue. When their eyes finally met, she smiled briefly and returned to her task. But Raymond walked up to her afterward, introducing himself with a calm voice and curious eyes. "You did a beautiful job," he said. Amaka nodded politely, not thinking much of it. But something about his presence felt different. He didn't look at her like a service worker. He looked at her like someone who mattered. Their conversation grew slowly over the weeks. Raymond began dropping by whenever he had meetings at the hotel. He always greeted her with warmth, never intruding, just showing interest. Amaka was cautious. She had built a hard shell around her emotions, one that didn't break easily. But Raymond was patient. He didn't ask too many questions. He never brought up her past, never acted entitled. Instead, he listened. When he finally asked her out for a proper lunch, Amaka hesitated, unsure if she was ready. But something told her to take a chance. That lunch turned into a series of dates, quiet, thoughtful, and healing. Raymond respected her boundaries, always asking what she needed, never demanding what he wanted. She found herself smiling more, laughing without guilt, and slowly opening up about her past. And instead of judging her, Raymond simply held her hand and said, "I'm proud of the woman you've become." Amaka didn't fall in love like before. She rose into it. There was no desperation, no chasing, no fear of being abandoned. She walked into the relationship knowing she was enough. Her business grew alongside their love. Raymond helped her design a website, taught her how to draft contracts, and connected her with professionals who respected her hustle. Not once did he try to take credit. And for the first time, Amaka felt like a woman, not a stepping stone. She would still wake up some nights, remembering the pain Kelechi caused, but it no longer controlled her. The scars were there, yes, but they were reminders of the fire she had walked through and survived. And Raymond? He didn't come to rescue her. He simply came to walk beside her, matching her pace, holding her gently, never pulling her back. For the first time in a long time, Amaka started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of a love that didn't hurt. It was 2 months before the wedding dinner party, when the first serious crack between Kelechi and Tonia became too loud to ignore. The signs had been there: Tonia's increasing detachment, her disregard for their finances, and her growing restlessness. Kelechi tried to suppress his concerns, brushing them off as temporary mood swings. But when he arrived home late one evening and found Tonia on a video call with a man who casually referred to her as baby, he realized his worst fear. He had not only lost Amaka, but he had also gambled everything on a woman who had no intention of building with him. When he confronted her, Tonia didn't deny it. She simply laughed, called him paranoid, and walked into the bedroom like his feelings were irrelevant. That was the moment Kelechi realized she didn't respect him. She tolerated him. And she only stayed because his money made her lifestyle possible. That night, he slept on the couch, not because he was kicked out, but because the bed they shared suddenly felt colder than the concrete floor outside. As his company faced a difficult stretch financially, Tonia's greed became more unbearable. She complained about the simplest things: cheap wine, local trips, even the color of the SUV she once begged him for. She called him stingy when he hesitated to give her more money to fund her boutique idea, even though he had just paid off her luxury apartment lease. What she didn't know, or didn't care to ask, was that Kelechi was borrowing money from friends to keep up appearances. He was drowning in silent debt just to remain the man she thought she was dating. The shame was suffocating. When he tried to have a heart-to-heart with her one night, expressing how overwhelmed he felt, Tonia rolled her eyes and asked, "Then why don't you go back to your ex-wife? Maybe she'll give you her beans and prayers again." It cut him deeper than she knew, not because she insulted Amaka, but because for the first time he wished he could. Kelechi began to withdraw. The man who once strutted with pride now spent his evenings in silence, staring at the wall while Tonia danced for TikTok videos. He thought about reaching out to Amaka more than once, maybe to apologize, maybe to reconnect. But every time he opened her profile, he hesitated. She looked too far gone. Not in distance, but in evolution. She had moved past him. Her captions were filled with gratitude and growth. Her business was thriving. She glowed in a way that made his chest ache. He wondered if she still remembered the nights they shared cold water because they couldn't afford food, or the evenings she massaged his head during migraines. Tonya didn't know that version of him. She never would. And he knew, deep in his soul, that even if Amaka never cursed him, life was already doing it on her behalf. Karma didn't always scream. Sometimes it smiled quietly in green dresses across wedding halls. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Amaka was packing decor equipment into her small van after a successful bridal shower when Raymond pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Let's take a walk," he said. They strolled through the park nearby, talking about everything and nothing. How she learned to make paper roses from scratch, the funny client who kept changing color themes, and her latest ambition, to open a physical showroom for Amara events and decor. Raymond listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering ideas, but never interrupting. As they sat on a bench under the shade of an almond tree, he said something that caught her off guard. "You're the most inspiring woman I've ever met." Amaka chuckled, brushing it off, but he stopped her gently. "No, I mean it. You didn't let pain define you. You turned it into purpose. That takes strength most people only pretend to have." Her eyes glistened. No one had ever said that to her, not even Kelechi. Raymond wasn't trying to win her over. He simply saw her. And in that moment, she realized that something real was blossoming. Their bond deepened quickly, but quietly. Amaka never made it public. She didn't flaunt Raymond online or parade him to friends. She guarded her peace because she had fought too hard for it. Still, people noticed her joy. Her smile had changed. It was fuller, less guarded. Her staff started teasing her subtly, and her clients loved how she lit up when talking about her work. Raymond supported her in every way, but never made her feel dependent. When she told him about her dream to attend a major wedding exhibition in Abuja, he didn't just offer to pay. He introduced her to event planners who could partner with her. He wasn't trying to be her savior. He was just giving her room to fly. Amaka, cautious but courageous, allowed herself to believe that not all love stories end in betrayal. Some, if nurtured with patience and respect, grow into safe places. Then came the unexpected call. A high-profile celebrity wanted her to decorate his daughter's engagement party. Amaka couldn't believe it. Her name had traveled farther than she realized. As she prepared for the event, she poured her heart into every detail. The client was impressed and invited her to a grand wedding dinner being hosted for industry elites and partners. At first, Amaka hesitated. Big events reminded her of everything she had lost: dignity, a husband, a future. But Raymond held her hand and said, "Walk into that room like you own it. Because you do." She smiled. And on the day of the dinner, she did just that. In her green dress, she didn't walk in seeking validation. She walked in as a woman who had already won. She didn't know Kelechi would be there. She didn't care. Her story had turned. And for once, she was ready to witness it fully unfold. Raymond's presence at the dinner party wasn't just romantic, it was symbolic. As they walked into the room together, Amaka felt an unfamiliar calm in her chest. She didn't scan the room for validation. She didn't fix her posture to impress anyone. She was there on invitation, on merit, and with a man who made her feel seen. Raymond stayed close by her side, introducing her to his colleagues with pride. "Meet Amaka, the brilliant mind behind Amara events," he said more than once. Amaka blushed, shaking hands with strangers who already knew her name. Some guests from old times recognized her too, but none dared ask about Kelechi. Their silence was louder than words. Meanwhile, Kelechi, watching from the other side, drowned in his glass of wine as Tonya flirted with someone else at the bar. The contrast was painful. One couple was performing love, the other was living it. As the event carried on, Amaka and Raymond moved to the dance floor. It wasn't a grand waltz or a show-off. It was simple. His hands on her waist, hers resting gently on his shoulder, their eyes locked in a rhythm only they understood. Guests noticed. Some whispered. A few smiled. In the corner of the hall, Kelechi sat still, the shadows of his choices pressing against his chest. He watched Amaka laugh freely, dance freely, live freely. He remembered the last time they danced. It had been years ago, in their living room, with no music, just humming. Amaka had spun in his arms and kissed his cheek. "One day we'll dance in a place we built," she had said. That day never came for them, but it had come for her, with someone else. And Kelechi knew, this was not just a moment. It was a mirror. As the music faded and the announcer took the stage to round off the event, a loud gasp echoed across the hall. All eyes turned toward the stage area. Raymond had dropped to one knee. Amaka froze. Her hands flew to her lips as tears welled up. He pulled out a small box and opened it, a silver ring with a modest but elegant stone. "I'm not here to complete you," he said. "I just want to walk beside a woman who's already whole." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers, and phones capturing the moment. Amaka, stunned, nodded through tears. "Yes," she whispered. Kelechi stood frozen, his soul collapsing in the same hall where he once believed he had won. The woman he left behind wasn't just surviving anymore. She was being chosen, right in front of him. And it wasn't a performance. It was love, the kind that doesn't come twice. That night after the dinner party, Kelechi sat alone in the back seat of his tinted SUV, staring blankly at the reflection in the window. The streets of Lagos buzzed with nightlife outside, but inside the vehicle, he was drowning in silence. Tonia hadn't bothered to come home with him. She left with another man, making no effort to pretend she cared anymore. His driver tried to engage him in conversation, but Kelechi waved him off. His chest felt heavy with 1,000 memories, some he had buried so deep they had grown fangs. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had done. Not just leaving Amaka, but how easily he had discarded her. How he never looked back. How he convinced himself she wasn't good enough, just so he could feel better about chasing fantasy. Now seeing her stand beside another man, radiant and whole, it was like facing judgment with no court, no jury, only truth. When Kelechi got home, the loneliness greeted him like a familiar enemy. He sat on the edge of the bed in his massive bedroom, surrounded by the luxury that had once made him feel like a king. The gold drapes, the imported tiles, the 75-inch TV, all meaningless now. He opened his phone, scrolled through old photos, and stopped on a blurry picture from years ago. Amaka sleeping on his lap, her head resting on his thigh, her fingers loosely holding his. They were in the apartment they shared in their struggling years, and she had just returned from work. He remembered taking the photo because he thought she looked beautiful, even in exhaustion. Back then, her love wasn't loud, but it was real. It showed in how she folded his clothes, in how she looked at him like he was enough, even when he had nothing. And now, he had everything but felt like nothing. He stared at the screen for a long time, then turned it off and placed it face down. The regrets didn't need light to haunt him. They lived in his reflection. Later that night, he stood in front of the mirror in his walk-in closet. The man looking back at him wasn't one he recognized anymore. The tailored suit didn't hide the hollowness in his eyes. The wristwatch didn't erase the fact that time had passed, and he had wasted it. He touched his face, then leaned in closer, as if trying to find traces of the man who once dreamed beside Amaka. But there was none. All that remained was a shell of success, a man who had climbed a mountain by stepping on the one woman who loved him, only to find that the view at the top meant nothing if you were alone. In that moment, Kelechi didn't cry, not because he wasn't broken, but because the guilt was too raw for tears. It sat in his chest like a stone, unmovable and cold. He had betrayed his past, and now had no part in her future. The proposal he witnessed tonight wasn't just about love. It was the final seal of his irrelevance in her story. In the days following the proposal, Amaka's world bloomed, with a sense of joy she had never known before. Not because of the ring, not even because of the public nature of the proposal, but because of what it symbolized. For the first time, love had returned to her on her own terms. Raymond wasn't just a man in her life, he was a safe place, a friend, a listener, a partner who didn't need to tear her down to feel tall. When she said yes, she wasn't just accepting a ring. She was accepting the idea that she could love again without losing herself. Her heart, once shattered by betrayal, had healed not because time passed, but because she did the work. She forgave, she grew, and she rebuilt from ashes that most people assumed would bury her. And now, as she sat on her couch days after the event, staring at the ring on her finger, she didn't think of revenge or victory. She thought of peace, of choosing herself first, and being rewarded with a man who saw her, not her past. Raymond's approach to planning the wedding was simple. He wanted whatever made her happy. "We don't need to impress anyone," he said one night over dinner. "Let's build a celebration that reflects us, honest, joyful, and real." Amaka smiled. That was exactly what she wanted. No rented horses, no fake pageantry, just love and the people who had stood by her when she had nothing. As the planning progressed, Amaka remained grounded. She didn't forget the dark days. She visited the kiosk she once slept in and placed flowers by the broken bench outside it. A gesture of gratitude, not because the pain was good, but because it had taught her who she truly was. Her life now was no miracle. It was a reward for endurance. A testimony not of luck, but of character. The smiles she wore were earned, not borrowed. And each time she caught Raymond looking at her with quiet admiration, she was reminded that real love doesn't have to shout. It simply stays. The engagement also came with a flood of messages from friends, former acquaintances, and even strangers who had followed her business page and admired her journey. But there was one message that stood out. It came from an unknown number and signed in red, "I'm sorry. You deserve better. I was too blind to see it." Amaka stared at it for minutes, knowing who it was from. She didn't respond, not because she was cruel, but because some chapters don't deserve a second line. Forgiveness doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it's found in silence, in choosing not to revisit the fire you barely survived. She turned off her phone, placed it aside, and walked outside to sit beneath the stars. She breathed deeply, allowing the breeze to wrap around her like an embrace. Her past was behind her. Her heart was whole. And for the first time in a long time, the love blooming in her life wasn't just a chapter. It was the beginning of a new story written with joy. Meanwhile, Kelechi's world was continuing to spiral. The business deals he had relied on to keep his image alive were slowly crumbling. One of his largest investors pulled out, citing concerns over mismanagement and instability. Antonia? She was gone. After the dinner party embarrassment, she had moved out without warning, taking most of the designer clothes and the last bit of money he had stashed in their shared account. He tried calling her, but her line was switched off. When he visited her boutique, he found the doors locked and empty. No one knew where she had gone. It wasn't heartbreak he felt, it was humiliation. The realization that he had given everything to a woman who had nothing invested in him. While Amaka was being chosen publicly, he was being abandoned privately. The irony stung. The house, once filled with noise and movement, now echoed with the sound of regret. Every wall, every room reminded him of how far he had fallen, not just in status, but in spirit. Kelechi tried to salvage what he could. He attended meetings, pitched ideas, and wore forced smiles in boardrooms. But even his voice betrayed him. He was no longer confident, he was desperate. And people could smell it. Rumors began spreading in circles that Kelechi was losing it, that his star was fading. It didn't take long for clients to pull away. Reputation in Lagos is like glass. It only takes one crack to shatter. Alone in his office, he stared at the framed photo on his desk, the one taken when his company first launched. He and Amaka had stood side by side, holding hands, their eyes filled with hope. He had forgotten that photo was even there. He picked it up slowly, staring at the younger version of himself. A man who once had everything that mattered and lost it chasing shadows. He placed the frame face down and sighed. There was no redemption arc waiting for him. Not everyone gets a second chance. Some wounds bleed forever. He thought about calling Amaka again, not to get her back, but to apologize, to say the words that had been sitting in his throat for months. But he knew it was too late. She had moved on, not just romantically, but emotionally. She had healed in a way he hadn't even begun to. She had done the work. He had only watched from afar. In his silence, he realized that losing her wasn't his greatest punishment. Watching her thrive without him was. Regret wasn't a loud visitor. It was a quiet, constant ache. And in that moment, Kelechi finally understood. Real paradise isn't filled with riches. It's filled with peace, purpose, and love. Three things he had once held in his hands and thrown away. The wedding dinner party had ended days ago, but its ripple effects were still flowing through the lives of those who attended. Amaka, now engaged and at peace, had returned to her business routine with a renewed sense of purpose. Raymond had gone back to his work trips, and everything felt aligned again. But for Kelechi, time was moving differently, slower, heavier, more punishing. The weight of watching Amaka be proposed to in front of industry giants, friends, and strangers haunted him every night. He replayed the moment in his head. Her joyful tears, the applause, the glow on her face, none of which were for him. He had received his invitation to the event through a mutual friend and attended to maintain relevance, to show he was still someone of importance. But fate had used the evening to undress him emotionally, exposing all his bad choices in public. And now, sitting alone at his dining table with unpaid bills, a deflated ego, and no companion, he began to taste the loneliness that once made him Maka. Days later, another event invitation came, this time from an old business partner hosting a casual wine tasting and investor gathering. Kelechi had no business attending. His accounts were dwindling, and his brand was quietly fading. But pride is a stubborn beast, and he couldn't stand the thought of disappearing without a final roar. He wore his best suit, borrowed his cousin's Benz, and walked into the venue like nothing was wrong. The room was full of familiar faces. Some shook his hand, others nodded stiffly. He could sense the whispers that trailed behind him, the subtle glances that suggested people knew more than they said. And then it happened. Amaka walked in. This time, alone. Raymond had flown abroad for a conference. She was invited as a guest speaker for a small panel on young entrepreneurship. Kelechi's heart clenched. She had arrived not as someone's plus one, but as someone who was now respected in her own right. And unlike him, she hadn't come to pretend. She belonged there, naturally, fully. During her panel session, Amaka spoke with clarity and humility, sharing how she grew her business from zero, how she learned marketing through YouTube, and how discipline, not luck, changed her life. The room was silent, hanging on her every word. Even Kelechi, seated at the far left corner, couldn't help but listen. She didn't mention her past. She didn't speak of betrayals or heartbreaks. But in her voice was the strength of someone who had walked through fire and emerged with her soul intact. When the panel ended and guests stood to clap, Amaka made eye contact with him for a brief second. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't even emotional. It was peaceful. Kelechi looked away. Because sometimes, when you break something too precious, all that's left to do is watch it shine in someone else's hands. And that evening, in a room he once would have dominated, he realized he was now the uninvited guest in a future that had outgrown him. The buzz from Amaka's panel performance had barely died down when a major event planning agency contacted her with a massive opportunity to design the centerpiece decor for a high-end wedding involving one of Nigeria's wealthiest families. It was a dream job, one she could have never imagined when she was scrubbing tiled floors and begging God for just one more chance. Amaka accepted it with gratitude and humility, channeling her emotions into her designs. On the morning of the wedding, she arrived early at the luxury hotel venue with her team, overseeing every detail. She wanted everything to be perfect, not for appearances, but because this was her craft, her healing, her statement. As she walked through the ballroom in her uniform, giving final instructions, her phone buzzed. It was Raymond. A video call. He was still in Dubai, but his smile lit up her screen. "I'm proud of you," he said. "And when I get back, let's pick a wedding date." Amaka smiled, cheeks flushed with warmth. This was her life now, full of choice, joy, and people who meant what they said. Kelechi arrived at the same wedding 2 hours later, this time not as an invited guest, but as a last-minute +1 to one of the lesser-known groomsmen. He hadn't planned to attend, but Lego circles are small, and when he heard Amaka's company was in charge of decor, curiosity and regret pulled him there like gravity. He entered the hall and was instantly stunned. The place was breathtaking. Roses floated on crystal waters, white feathers dangled from the chandeliers, and a floral arch stood tall in the center of the dance floor. It was elegance redefined. Then he saw her, Amaka, gracefully arranging the final detail near the stage. She was in branded attire, her staff moving like clockwork around her, her face composed yet confident. He watched her for minutes, unseen, and all he could think of was how he once had access to that version of her, before the world did. The bride and groom entered. The ceremony began, and at a point during the couple's dance, the groom surprised the bride with a second ring. He knelt, confessing how she saved him from depression and made him a better man. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the hall erupted in cheers. Kelechi's eyes darted to Amaka. Her face was soft, her smile genuine. But he knew in that moment what haunted him wasn't the groom on one knee. It was the image of himself, remembering he had never done that for her. Never gave her flowers. Never gave her a public moment. Never even truly said thank you. He gave Tonya vacations, cars, even press features. But Amaka? He gave her silence and abandonment. And now, even though she wore someone else's ring, he realized she was always the bride he never honored. The ring scene wasn't just romantic, it was poetic justice. And he sat in that hall, clapping with the others, while his heart wept quietly for the life he threw away. That night, Kelechi didn't go home immediately. He drove around the city aimlessly, past familiar landmarks that now felt foreign. He passed by the old apartment he once shared with Amaka, now painted anew, with strangers living inside. He parked across the street and stared at the window where they once used to eat together, laugh over cheap comedy skits, and dream out loud. The memories came like a flood, uninvited and unrelenting. He saw Amaka carrying plastic bags filled with vegetables, smiling even when tired. He saw her in an old wrapper, singing as she mopped the floor. And then he saw the version of himself that mocked her dreams, that rolled his eyes when she talked about wanting to start something of her own. He had never believed in her, and now the world did. That irony was the sharpest thorn in his regret. It wasn't just that he lost her. It was that he never really saw her until someone else did. He drove to a bar, drank more than he should have, and ended up vomiting in the parking lot. His friend had to come pick him up. "Guy, what's wrong with you?" the friend asked. Kelechi didn't respond. He didn't know how to explain that he wasn't mourning a breakup. He was mourning a legacy he never let bloom. His friend, oblivious to the storm inside him, kept talking about work and politics. But Kelechi barely heard him. His mind was elsewhere. On the day he left Amaka, on the look in her eyes when she didn't cry, didn't beg, just watched him walk away. He realized now that her silence was never weakness. It was strength. She let him go without a fight because she knew something he didn't. That life has a way of rewarding those who endure. That strength born of suffering becomes power. And her power now glowed so brightly, it was burning his conscience to ashes. When he got home, the emptiness of his apartment mocked him. No scent of food. No humming. No gentle laughter. Just shadows. He sat on the floor of his living room, surrounded by luxury he no longer cared for, and cried, quietly, bitterly. Not because he missed her presence, but because he missed his purpose. Amaka had loved him at his lowest, and when he rose, he stepped on her to reach higher. But now he wasn't falling. He had already hit the ground. And the worst part? No one was there to help him up. The same people he tried to impress now ignored his calls. Tonya was gone. His business was on life support. And the woman he should have fought for? She was walking into a future he would never be part of. Regret, he learned, doesn't kill in a moment. It drains you slowly. And tonight, as he lay on the cold floor staring at the ceiling, Kelechi realized he wasn't losing anymore. He had already lost everything that truly mattered. Weeks after the wedding event, where Amaka once again made a mark, she received a message through her website's contact form. It wasn't a business inquiry, but a heartfelt message from someone using their full name this time, Kelechi. The message wasn't long, but its words were heavy. I was a fool. I see it now. You gave me everything, and I gave you nothing but pain. If you're willing, please meet me. I need to say it to your face. Amaka read it 3 times before closing the tab. Her heart didn't skip a beat, nor did it tremble. The woman who once waited years for an apology now needed no validation. Still, a part of her, a part that remembered those lonely nights in a kiosk, that prayed for healing while battling betrayal, felt that meeting him might be a final key to locking that chapter forever. She agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe, not out of emotion, but out of power. She wanted him to see, in full clarity, the woman he let go, and the peace he would never touch again. When Kelechi arrived at the cafe, his appearance shocked her. He looked older, not just physically but emotionally. The sharpness in his eyes had dulled, his suit no longer crisp, and his once confident posture now slouched with shame. He stood when she walked in, swallowing hard as he took the sight of her, still elegant, composed, and glowing. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a simple dress, and the strength of someone who had rebuilt herself. They sat. There was no small talk, no performance. Kelechi didn't waste time. His voice cracked as he spoke. He told her how he failed, how he replaced real love with vanity, how he laughed at her while she suffered, and how every success he built without her turned to dust. I was wrong, Amaka. I see it now. I don't expect anything from you. I just want to say, I'm sorry. Genuinely. Amaka listened in silence, her fingers calmly wrapped around her coffee mug. When he finished, she placed the mug down, looked him in the eye, and simply said, I forgave you the day I decided to love myself. There was a long pause. Kelechi nodded slowly, blinking back tears. Thank you, he whispered. Not for forgiving me, but for surviving me. Amaka gave a small, bittersweet smile. I didn't survive you, Kelechi. I survived my silence, my doubt, and the belief that I was unworthy. You were just the catalyst. She stood, adjusted her bag, and extended her hand. I wish you peace. I truly do. But this is the last time we will ever meet like this. He shook her hand, holding it a second longer, perhaps hoping for something more, but Amaka pulled away gently. As she walked out, she didn't look back. The closure wasn't for him, it was for her. The storm that once shattered her was now behind her, and in its place stood a woman who had not only healed but blossomed. And the man who once left her in the rain now sat alone in a cafe, watching the sunlight follow her out the door. After the meeting with Kelechi, Amaka felt lighter, not because she had received an apology, but because she had faced her past without trembling. That night, she stood by the window of her new apartment, a spacious home she had earned through sheer resilience, and watched the Lego skyline with quiet triumph. Raymond was returning the next day, and they had finalized a date for their wedding. Life felt like a reward now, not a burden. She walked through her home slowly, touching the furniture, the framed certificates on her wall, the photo of her with her first decoration team. Every inch of the space screamed, I built this. Her business was growing beyond what she had imagined, and she had started mentoring other young women who reminded her of herself, wounded, humble, but full of potential. Amaka didn't just want success for herself anymore. She wanted to leave a legacy, not for applause, but for healing, because she had learned that the most powerful women are not those who never broke, but those who broke and rebuilt with their own hands. Meanwhile, Kelechi had begun the painful journey of starting over, not from scratch, but from ruin. The debt he once ignored had caught up with him. His business license was under review, and the flashy lifestyle he once paraded was now a haunting memory. His phone, once filled with endless messages and party invites, was now silent. Friends who used to beg for favors no longer returned his calls. The condo he lived in was up for sale, and he had begun seeking consultancy jobs to keep afloat. But what hurt him most wasn't the money, it was the emptiness, the emotional vacuum that screamed louder than any bank notification. He now understood that he hadn't just lost Amaka. He had lost the version of himself that had value, loyalty, and purpose. Every morning, he sat on the same couch and stared at the last photo of them together before the breakup. And each time he whispered, "I'm sorry," into the silence, knowing it changed nothing but his own sense of regret. Despite everything, Kelechi didn't try to win Amaka back. He knew she was far gone, far healed. So he poured himself into becoming a better man, not for her, but for himself. He joined therapy, started reading again, and volunteered to speak at local youth tech centers, not to boast, but to warn. He told his story with honesty, about how success without humility is just failure in disguise. The applause he received now wasn't for being flashy, it was for being real. Slowly, he began to regain something deeper than reputation, self-respect. And even though he no longer believed he deserved Amaka, he was grateful that her story didn't end in tragedy. It gave him hope that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible, even if it came too late for love. As the days melted into weeks, Amaka's wedding preparations began to reflect the woman she had become. Refined but grounded, elegant yet simple. There were no extravagant shows of wealth, no attention-seeking spectacles. Instead, her guest list was filled with real people, clients who became friends, staff who became family, and neighbors who cheered her on when she had nothing. The wedding would take place in a serene garden in Acacia, surrounded by trees and flowers, symbolizing growth and renewal. Raymond, ever the calm force, stood beside her in every decision. He never tried to control. He simply supported, trusting her instincts and smiling at every idea she suggested. They chose matching emerald and gold for their color scheme, a subtle nod to the dress Amaka wore the night he proposed. That dress, like their love, represented transformation. On the day of her bridal shower, Amaka received dozens of heartfelt messages, but the one that made her pause came from her old canteen boss. "I always knew you'd rise," it read, "but you've flown higher than any of us imagined." The day before the wedding, Amaka visited her former neighborhood. She walked past the kiosk where she once slept, now abandoned and crumbling. She knelt and placed a white rose beside it, whispering, "Thank you for sheltering my brokenness." Passers-by stared, some recognizing her, others curious. But Amaka didn't care. This moment wasn't for show, it was a sacred goodbye. She then visited the church she once cleaned, not to pray for blessings, but to give thanks. She sat quietly in the last pew, the place she had once wept when she thought her life was over. And in that silence she smiled. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it had matured into wisdom. Her journey hadn't been easy. It was carved through betrayal, hunger, humiliation, and nights of self-doubt. But it had made her. And now, she was walking into a new life, not rescued by love, but celebrated by it. Far away, Kelechi scrolled through social media and saw a picture of Amaka's pre-wedding photo shoot. She was glowing, not in a way that needed filters or designer clothes, but in the way only peace could make a person shine. He stared for minutes before closing his phone. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply sighed. Because now he understood. She wasn't the woman he lost. She was the woman he never truly had the courage to keep. And now she belonged to a world he couldn't enter, a story he couldn't rewrite. As he stood from his small table preparing for another job pitch, he smiled faintly, not from joy, but from a quiet kind of pain. The kind that teaches you that some women don't just walk away, they rise. And the greatest lesson a man can learn is this: never abandon a woman who believes in your becoming. Because when she becomes untouchable. The garden was alive with music, gentle wind, and laughter as the sun smiled upon the most beautiful day of Amaka's life. The aisle was lined with gold-trimmed emerald petals, and guests dressed in earth-toned elegance whispered with admiration as she emerged, hand in hand with her father, who had traveled from the east just to walk her down the aisle. Her gown wasn't the loud, over-glamorous type. No, it was delicate lace with intricate floral embroidery, hugging her silhouette with grace, and flowing behind her like a quiet river. Her hair was braided into a simple crown, and on her face was the calm glow of a woman who knew she had arrived. not just at a wedding, but at a destiny she built with blood, tears, and unwavering faith. As she approached the altar, her eyes met Raymond's, and time stood still. He looked at her the same way he always did, not like a prize, but like a partner. As she stood before him, surrounded by the people who mattered most, she wasn't nervous. She was ready, not because of the man she was marrying, but because of the woman she had become. The ceremony was short, sincere, and unfiltered. No grand speeches, no dramatic performances, just vows that came from deep places. "I'm not here to fix you," Raymond said, taking her hand. "I'm here to walk with you through every victory and valley. You don't complete me, you inspire me." Amaka's voice trembled with emotion as she responded, "I spent years thinking love was pain. But with you, I learned that love is peace. You didn't heal me. You reminded me I could heal myself." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was thunderous, but the joy in their embrace was louder. As they walked down the aisle together, Amaka caught the gaze of an elderly woman crying quietly in the third row, her former landlady who once gave her a free week in the kiosk during a storm. They smiled at each other, bound by a shared history that no wealth could erase. For every person in that crowd who knew her story, this moment wasn't just a wedding. It was a victory march. Not far from the venue, Kelechi stood outside the gate. He hadn't been invited. He didn't expect to be. But something inside him had needed to come, even if it was just to witness her joy from afar. He saw the guests, heard the music, and imagined her walking down that aisle, strong, radiant, unbroken. He clutched a small box in his palm, the engagement ring he once bought for Tonia, now meaningless. With a deep sigh, he dropped it into the gutter beside the sidewalk and walked away, whispering a soft prayer for her happiness. He knew now that not every man who loses a good woman gets to watch her eyes. But he did, and it changed him. Inside the venue, Amaka twirled gently in Raymond's arms, laughing with abandon. The ring on her finger sparkled under the fading sunlight, simple, elegant, and earned. This was the ring she deserved, not because it was expensive, but because it came with respect, with peace, and with love that didn't require her to shrink. And in that final moment of the evening, as the stars began to rise above the garden, Amaka knew her story had come full circle. And this time, it belonged only to her. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.